foreign predatory parasitic corporations are replacing our natural environment with an industrial landscape of wind turbines. One Nation will stand against sending children down a path of drug dependency and body mutilation to appease the gender cult. Leave our kids alone. The Trusted Digital Identity Bill is a global surveillance and control mechanism that profit-hungry corporations and power-mad politicians drafted and crafted. One Nation opposes this inhuman, dystopian future that the United Nations promotes as the Great Reset, and we condemn this Parliament for signing onto it. I called for Australia to reject the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and instead mount a great resist. Just like the koalas being euthanised to make way for wind turbines or damaged solar panels leaking toxic heavy metals into waterways, the United Nations net zero plan again involves killing the environment to save it. I've been speaking about the fear, the oppression and the inhuman cruelty of our COVID response since July 2020. I promised to hound down those responsible, and I will continue relentlessly to keep that promise. You're about to be live with me, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Right. Well, good afternoon. It's Friday again. Time for the weekly wrap-up from the only opposition party. Can you hear me? That's the first thing to say. I can't hear myself, so I'm hoping you can hear me. Someone give me a thumbs up. We're the only party that's listening to and serving the Australian people. Now, I've got, as usual, we try to limit our topics, but we've just got a huge heap of topics, many topics. And I have to end today at 3:45 because I've got to get to another meeting. So, big news for the week, as far as I'm concerned, was the March for Australia on Sunday, last Sunday. What an amazing day. Standing on the stage, well, even walking, well, even starting before we even started walking at the amphitheatre at Roma Street in Brisbane. It was just a sea of flags and people happy, and Scott Challen and Dusty Bogan, or Ben Shand as his real name is, and the other organisers must be congratulated for a phenomenal job. Can you hear me clearly? Okay. And can people on the live stream watching hear me clearly? Because I've been told we had the microphone away from my face, so we've been told that it was too soft. Getting back to Scott Challen, Ben Shand and the other organisers, what an amazing job these people did. Truly amazing. Very professional. All contributed by donations, and I'm guessing that was largely Scott, but I hope I haven't offended anyone by saying that. But it was truly amazing. They had water. They had a band. They had a very bloody good band. They had a stage in the Botanical Gardens. They had the amphitheatre where we started in Roma Street, and then the march route was planned. Oh, and we had fantastic security guards in white. And we had in white uniforms, white shirts, so we could pick them out. Each of us was given a security guard to be close to us at any time. We had no problems, by the way, none at all. The usual ratbags hid themselves behind masks and tried to have a protest, but the police made sure nothing happened there. Then we also had the Queensland Police Service and we had the Australian Federal Police. And I want to thank every one of those people involved in the security. What a great bunch of people, very professional, very friendly, very personable. So that's it. So we started at the amphitheatre in Roma Street. Then we marched behind wonderful Aussie music the whole way through the city, across the Victoria Street Bridge, across the Brisbane River, down past South Bank, back across the Goodwill Bridge into the Botanical Gardens where they had the stage set up and sound systems and band. And Scott, man, that guy, and Dusty Bogan, Ben Shand, entertaining speakers, entertaining compares, entertaining hosts, did a marvellous job, a really marvellous job. And what was even better, if anything could top the organisation, were the thousands of flags that turned up being waved. I got up on stage and took a video, which I've posted, took a few photos. It was just so proud. And when we were marching, we looked behind. We were marching near the front. When we looked behind, we just saw a sea of flags. I mean, not little flags, big, normal-sized flags from flagpoles, just waving. And it was just unbelievable. Back in the march in Canberra, back in 22 or whenever it was, I was walking with my wife and there were hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of people. And I remember looking across to Christine and saying, this is the first time in 3 years that I felt proud to be Australian again after the disgraceful mismanagement and fraud about the COVID response. But this was the same again, except even more flags. Wonderful, truly wonderful. You can see it really struck me. I'm going to give you a few speeches, and thanks for everyone who came up to me during after the speeches and congratulated me for my speech. We set a new tone with our speech, and also the following 2 days later at Wagga Wagga in New South Wales, southern central New South Wales. Look, I won't go through the speech in detail, but I want to mention a few key points, several key points, because we said a few things here that needed to be said that people didn't expect us to say. So I'll read them in snippets. For 5 years, my Senate office team and I have led the way in establishing mass migration and record homelessness as key threats to our country. The bigger threat to our country, is crony capitalism. The billionaires that run the world came to Australia under Prime Minister Menzies, who allowed 25% of Australian manufacturing to be sold to foreign owners who promptly moved that manufacturing offshore to low-wage countries. That's what happened in our country in the 50s. And since then, it's got far, far worse. I went on to say, in the Australia we knew, though, there was always a parent at home and a sense of community. In the Australia we knew, and this is important, in the Australia we knew, immigration grew this country. From Europeans after the war to Vietnamese after that war, people came here to Australia and rewarded our beautiful country with their loyalty, hard work and endeavour. That is fact. Lifting themselves up, and in so doing, lifting all who are here in Australia. Greek, Italian, British, South American and Vietnamese arrivals made their way into state and federal parliaments, seeking to protect the Australia for which their families came here, to protect you and your way of life, all of us. I hope the changing political landscape in the next year will bring together Australian patriots of all backgrounds and races to save our beautiful country from the greed of crony capitalists and the tyranny of globalist politicians in the mainstream parties, the Liberals, the Labor, the Nationals, the Greens, the Teals. Well, that's not all the Nationals. Some of them are starting to stand up. I'll skip a few parts and then I'll say, these politicians are ignoring Australians sleeping under bridges, in tents and cars, working families unable to afford a home in what should be one of the world's richest countries. They ignore the small business owners, losing everything as insane net zero policies drive businesses into the red. While some businesses stay afloat with subsidies to their corporate mates, subsidies for which you pay, you and I pay. I'll skip again. These captured politicians are quislings, betrayers, and have created the tools of tyranny to defend their wealth transfer. Add an e-safety commissar, and I'll just divert for a minute, because this was not just about mass migration destroying our country in many, many ways. It was about government overreach and government control, and people are genuinely afraid of that, and they should be. They should be rightly concerned. But it's also about identity. Anyway, add an e-safety commissar to silence debate, a digital ID to keep your social credit score, to deperson opponents as in China, a social media age restriction to ensure children not only hear one point of view, the globalist point of view. Replacing our identity as Australians with a government-decreed globalist identity. And I mentioned off the cuff that the young people of today, people from 18 to say 35, even 40, are the most lied to generation, most lied to group ever. When I was growing up, we were told, we were promised, if you study hard, work hard, get a good job, get a trade, become a professional, whatever. If you work hard, you can settle down with a lady and then have a family and have a house at a reasonable price. That's what the Uni Party continue to promise, but it's bullshit. They are not doing that. They're continuing to lie. So I then said, Australian democracy is on life support. And I mean that. We are on life support. And then I looked at the audience and said, thanks to you, though, marches like this have them, the politicians, the sellout politicians, terrified. Because before their plan of betrayal has even been completed, we, the people, are realising the water around us is boiling. Congratulations for coming today, and thank God for your wisdom and awareness. Your voice, your participation in the political debate is more important now than at any time in our history. One Nation is leading with commitment to repeal all of these pieces of legislation and introduce constitutional changes to guarantee your freedom, including your freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and your right to defend yourself in your own home with castle law, and yes, with a weapon. Australian wealth must stay here in Australia, creating jobs for Australians. So this speech was recorded, like all the speeches, and it'll be up on our website once we get a copy from the organisers. Copy of the recording, that is. I went on. Let me be clear. What One Nation will not do is confuse skin colour with patriotism and loyalty. Traitorous white politicians have voted in Parliament to make foreign capital wealthier and everyday Australians poorer and less free, more enslaved. Sold you out while pretending to represent you. Betrayers. To what was once the White Australia Brigade, I say, the world's crony capitalists are all white and mostly all male. Their tokenistic and divisive campaigns like net zero, transgenderism, DEI, feminism, and their war on masculinity stop at the door of their own palaces of power in London, Geneva, Zurich, and New York. The rules never apply to the people who make the rules. Instead of race and skin colour, we must see character and patriotism. And I thought a couple of people might call me out on that, but no one did. I got cheers for making those statements. You see, Australians are not racist. Australians are not racist. That's why the Greens appeal to racism, accusations of racism, because they know Australians don't like it. So when they're saying that, they know there's no merit to their claims that Australians are racist. I went on. One Nation was born of the same Australia you came out today to defend, and thank you all for defending. 30 years ago, Pauline Hanson called her party One Nation for a very good reason. Pauline saw all of this coming. In my first speech in the Senate in September 2016, I called on Australia to exit the United Nations. That's now part of One Nation policy, and I'm very, very proud of that. And so is Pauline. We're the only party to want to exit the UN. And I also called in September 2016 to an end to Agenda 21. Stop Agenda 21. Pauline called out Agenda 21 in 1996, nearly 30 years ago. And I went on, no unelected global government or global identity. One Nation will defend the Australian ideal and the Australian identity of one community made up of many different backgrounds, skin colours and religions, working together to lift up all Australians. When I grew up, we didn't bother about where people came from. Yet now our politicians are letting in people who hate Australia, and that's highly significant. Worse, we have politicians in Parliament who hate Australia. I mean that sincerely. I've worked side by side with some of these bastards. Our vision has nothing to do with skin colour, birthplace or religion within the limits of common sense. And I add, Islam is outside our limits. Burqas and Sharia have no place in this country. And a lot of people cheered at that. This is widespread in Australia, this sentiment. It's okay to bring your own culture here to Australia, provided it fits with ours. And don't try to eliminate our Aussie culture to make room for another. I went on. If you've come here to leech off our welfare and take for yourselves the wealth our forebears have created over hundreds of years, then One Nation has a simple message about where you can go. Say it with me, and the audience did. Go back to where you came from. Remigrate home. I want a fair go for those who created the wealth that crony capitalists are now stealing from us using globalist politicians and immigrants from countries that hate us. One Nation will deport the 100,000 illegals here now, send home students milking their status, and adopt net negative immigration until infrastructure catches up and until we can sort through those who have come here during Albanese's mass migration invasion. I'll skip a bit more. Like you, I came here today to the march, that is, because we have had enough. Shut the gate. We want our Australia back. We all want to keep our identity and heritage as Australians. We want to keep our identity and heritage as Australians. Thank you so much for so many supporters who really appreciated those comments. So mass migration, I won't talk about the main impacts, but because I've done that many times, we're concerned about the numbers of people, number one, for reasons I've mentioned repeatedly. We're concerned about the lack of skills. 86 to 87% of immigrants coming in recent years have had no skills. No skills. Yet Albanese tells us they're construction workers. That is a complete lie. He's repeatedly said that. The percentage of immigrants who are construction workers, construction experience, is 0.6%. Building houses supposedly for 99.4% of immigrants, millions of immigrants, plus millions of Australians. This is nonsense. The third point is, it's destroying our culture. And that's intentional throughout the West. The United Nations program, the World Economic Forum program, to smash the culture. And number four, and arguably the most important, is they're trying to destroy our heritage, destroy our history, destroy our roots. And that's something that is heinous. They're trying to do that everywhere. They want a one world global governance. Not my words, their words. Despite the very positive protests and the large numbers of protesters, Channel 7 in Melbourne and in Brisbane reported on some violence in the Melbourne protests. The police commissioner, and someone posted on X, and I retweeted it on X. The police commissioner said that he was very, very happy. This is the Victorian police commissioner, was very, very happy with the fact that the protesters, the anti-mass migration protesters, those who wanted to bring back Australia, they were wonderful, peaceful, orderly, obeyed the orders, and stuck within their permits. The people who caused problems, and the police commissioner in Victoria, the deputy police commissioner in Victoria, to his credit, identified them. The left. The left were the violent ones. When Channel 7 broadcast the report of that deputy police commissioner talking, they omitted the comments about the left being violent, and they implied, from what I was told, that we, the protesters, were violent. Complete lie. And why do anti-protesters wear masks? Because they don't want to be seen. They haven't got the guts to stand up and be seen. The main issue is beyond mass migration. It's we want our Australia back. Our identity, our national identity, is part of our personal identity. For example, when you go overseas, you introduce yourself as, I introduce myself as Malcolm Roberts, Australian, because people usually say, what's your name and where are you from? Identity is tied up in national identity. And as I said, the other issues were digital ID in particular, the Uni Party's dishonest government. People have had a gutful of being lied to. They've had enough. Oh, and then we went on to another great thing. We had a Wagga Wagga branch meeting, the inaugural One Nation branch in Wagga Wagga. Actually, that might not be true. The inaugural branch may have been back around 1998, but this was the new One Nation and the inaugural branch meeting in Wagga Wagga. And I want to thank Paul Fennell. He has stood up as a councillor. He stood up as a candidate in the DLP before. He stood up as a citizen. He stood up as a ratepayer. He has taken on so many challenges. Well, he's now leading the formation of the One Nation Party and branch in Wagga Wagga. They can't silence Paul Fennell. They've tried many, many times with many, many tactics. But I also want to thank his many helpers. The room was set up beautifully, lots of fantastic decorations and flags. The organisation, and they only had 8 days' notice, and we got 130 people. Filled the room, and some people standing up the back. A very large group. More importantly, and more pleasingly for me, that the group listened and asked lots of really sensible questions to which we gave direct answers. The issues? People want our Australia back. They want our Australia back. And then a third really positive experience on the plane. I'm starting to get goosebumps talking about this. I won't mention the person's name. I was sitting right down the back in the last row, and I sat down next to a decent looking guy. He just looked like an everyday Aussie, jeans, country shirt. He was a farmer. but he was way more than the farmer. And I've got so much respect for farmers, but he was way more than the farmer. He's an innovative, practical manufacturer. The farm he operates sends its product to a factory, and they make pet food. So I'm not going to tell you any more than that. The man is self-educated. He's extremely well-spoken, very, very practical. He's had fantastic experience in across New South Wales, across Queensland, earth-moving, farming, other things. But he's taken on the farm, and he's doing a marvellous job of it, and adding value adding by processing some of the products of the farm and creating pet food, a huge range of pet food. And the man's professionalism. I mean, this guy is self-educated. No woke universities have bent him out of shape, and I won't mention his name, as I said, but I'm going to get in touch with him again. We exchange details because I'd like to do a podcast with him. He's everything a really fine Australian needs to know. So he's innovative, he's practical, he's straight, looks you in the eye and just tells you exactly what he thinks. What a wonderful person to have a conversation. I normally don't talk much on a plane. I have a lot of work, and I had a lot of work to catch up on, a lot of reading. But I just set that aside. He was just brilliant, very inspiring. You know, he was going to Queensland on a trip to visit some way of automating his manufacturing for higher quality. He's not happy with just having cornered the market and being the only provider in the world to provide a certain product to pet owners. But he wants to improve it and improve the quality. There's nothing wrong with the quality now, but he wants to go further. He said it's all about staying one step ahead, and he's got a practical bent for solutions. You know, today's farming is no longer just scratching the dirt and throwing out a few seeds or raising a few cattle. All farmers have to be highly professional, have to stay on top of markets, have to be educated, self-educated, the best form of education. And they are doing a marvellous job to minimise the cost of food, for us who live in cities or on the edge of cities and want food. They provide our security, they provide our food, they provide our clothing. They do so at a significant cost, and a hell of a cost in the form of government intrusion and control that's making it so much more difficult to these progressive, and I mean truly progressive, small businesses. I've just got to keep an eye on time. Let's get into some of the nonsense that's going on. Again, some of these things have been raised by constituents. Westpac, the work from home ruling. And I'm going to read these comments, and I want to thank my staff again for providing some of these comments so that people get not only an informative but a comprehensive and entertaining snippet of what's happening in Australia right now. This is our country. It's going to the dogs, apart from the three things that I've just discussed. Westpac. Fair Work Commission has ruled on a work from home case against Westpac. The bank ordered the employee to attend the office 2 days a week, and the Fair Work overruled them. The employer ordered the employee to work at the business 2 days a week, and the Fair Work Commission overruled them. It's triggered a discussion and a huge concern in the industry that businesses, particularly small businesses, may not be able to regain control of working arrangements that existed before COVID without the threat of legal action. That's absurd. The feeling of most people appears to be that employment conditions should remain a matter between the employer and the employee. The primary workplace relationship is between the employer and the employee. That's in every workplace relationship, every workplace. And where the employees want, union movement should be involved if the employee wants it. So we want to keep unions with the option if people want it. But the primary relationship is between the employer and the employee, and that's being destroyed by the bureaucracy. There's a lot of concern about inviting the government, and particularly some union bosses, rogues, into these conversations. But if the employee wants it, they're entitled to have it. But the union bosses must start working for Australians, must start working for protecting workers. And we've given you many instances of where union bosses are part of a collusion with some rogue international employees and some employers rather, and some labour hire firms in our country, undermining and selling out workers, not protecting them, selling them out. Government should not be interfering in employer-employer relationships. Jobs are being outsourced. Westpac will start to outsource those jobs. and that will destroy, and small businesses are being destroyed. Greater revenue will come. What the union bosses want is to work with the Labor government to get greater revenue from the union bosses to Labor campaigns. How many employees in this country covered by a major union know that their money, their wages, their dues to the union every year are being siphoned off and sent to the Labor Party, which is destroying jobs through net zero and through mass migration? What this will do, this ruling, will hollow out the bush and decrease employment in Australia and make it easier to just send it to call centres overseas. And then, speaking of government intrusion, another constituent provided this about the Bureau of Meteorology website. A lot of people say, I love the Bureau of Meteorology's old website with the radar map. On Wednesday this week, the Bureau of Meteorology, revealed its $4 million website upgrade to the Australian people. People are wondering where that $4 million went. The Bureau of Meteorology has taken a website that looked good and worked functionally. It worked functionally. Wasn't always correct, of course, because the Bureau of Meteorology doesn't know how to forecast weather properly, not like the professional weather forecasters. Anyway, they turned that website into a bland corporate husk of what it used to be. Confusing layouts, hidden information, difficult user interface, a bland user interface. What the hell went wrong with the Bureau of Meteorology? That's the best you could do with let me say it again, 4 million taxpayer dollars. This is just another form of the government trying to fix something that isn't broken. Sounds familiar, right? One Nation wants a reduction in government intrusion. Speaking of government intrusion, there's hardly anything worse than net zero. But now we're getting onto something that's allied. It's come from Canada. Indigenous being allowed in Canada to take ownership of people's property. Take ownership of people's property. It's coming to a country near you. We imported the term First Nations people from Canada. We imported many of the stealing of property rights from Canada. A lot of this rubbish from the UN and the World Economic Forum has come from Canada. Anyway, I'll read the notes from yet another constituent. The city of Richmond in Canada was trending this week due to the decision of the British Columbia Supreme Court in Cowichan Tribes versus Canada. Essentially, the residents' private property rights were overruled and undermined in a ruling favouring First Nations people in Canada. I'm going to quote, "For those whose property is in the area outlined in black, the court has declared Aboriginal title to your property, which may compromise the status and validity of your ownership. This was mandated without any prior notice to the landowners. The entire area outlined in green is claimed on appeal by the Cowichan First Nations." End of the quote. These are people's homes. Hundreds of homes, farms, golf courses, port facilities. And it's happening in other parts of Canada where infrastructure and shared natural assets are being taken over. That's in Canada. Look though what's happening here. We said no to the voice to Parliament, and yet states such as Victoria are pushing ahead with treaties that could undermine land rights here in Australia. Never mind Native Title Act that's got 60% or more under native title at the moment, or claims of native title. By the way, I must compliment Glenn at Wagga Wagga, who pulled me aside. He was sitting in the audience. He pulled me aside before we started, and then we met afterwards. He told me that, and he gave me the paperwork. He said the treaties are the real aim. What he claims is that Glenn at Wagga Wagga thinks that the voice referendum was just a distraction, happening in parallel. So the two processes, the voice was going on in parallel, leading to what they hoped was constitutional referendum, constitutional change. It didn't work. But while that was going on, they were working on the Makarrata, the treaty underneath. And that's where they want control over Australia. Plus, where are we good? Oh, returning to net zero. There's been some talk of the Aboriginal takeover of, the Aboriginal industries takeover, just a few Aboriginals taking over in senior positions, land in this country and other property rights in this country. is part of a global push by the United Nations and World Economic Forum, as is net zero and the climate fraud. There's been some talk in London of the British imposing a personal carbon dioxide allowance. Tony Blair, I remember speaking at a conference in Brisbane around about, I'm guessing now, 2012, 2014, somewhere like that. And one of the speakers was a consultant who'd been helping the Blair government. That should give me a better idea of the time involved. Anyway, the year. But anyways, the Blair government involved. And this consultant, Australian consultant, an Aussie, was due to come home. And Tony Blair's government pulled him aside and said, just before you go, what are your thoughts on putting in place a personal carbon dioxide allowance from the food you eat, the travel you do, the job you have, the assets you have? So they wanted to discuss personal carbon dioxide allowances. Now, Liz Truss, the former very short-lived Prime Minister, or short-term Prime Minister, she's not short-lived, short-term Prime Minister from Britain, was speaking at CPAC recently. I attended, and she made a lot of common sense. She said that Blair wrecked the British constitutionally. He created or dismissed key statutory controls and took it back into government control. And Blair, the former Prime Minister, is now saying that the energy transition under net zero needs to be questioned because he can now see how much damage he's doing it. So, and by the way, don't think that this is just for the pommies. Like the censorship controls that are drastic in Britain, they're coming to Australia. They're already here, some of them. The Commonwealth Bank has in its form been reported as having elements of social credit system already in place. I've forgotten the details. We need to question socialism. Everywhere socialism has been applied, it has failed. It has absolutely, resoundingly failed. We need to question it. One of the worst comments I've ever heard, the most inaccurate comments I've ever heard, was Kevin Rudd, one of many of his inaccurate comments, when he said, as a result of the global financial crisis, which was caused by socialist banks operating behind the power of government, hidden from the market. He said capitalism needs to be saved from itself, so he introduced a lot of wasting of money. Capitalism needs to be saved from itself. What we've got at the moment is not capitalism, we've got socialism. Can you just flip that screen down? That's right. So if you want to have a look at some ways of getting out of socialism and back to free enterprise and back to opportunity for all Australians, have a look at our policies from the last federal election. They were released around about January, February. Have a look at them. They're taking us back to capitalism. Speaking of government intrusion, government sloppiness, government deceit, Senate estimates that was on 3 weeks ago for 4 days was the worst Senate estimates I have ever experienced in 8 years of Parliament. 8 years of the Senate, that's the worst ever. Organisation. Look, energy, housing and other key issues in the government were hidden. We asked for 7 energy agencies. We got to 2. The rest were dismissed because they were running behind time. Key topics embarrassing to the government were delayed and agencies sent home. This government is not about transparency. It's even worse than the Liberals, the other cheek of the uni party. They're hiding, they're resigning from transparency, they don't like accountability. Speaking of not liking accountability and being given a free rein, the E-Safety Commissar. This is put together again by another constituent. Now that the Commissar, E-Safety Commissar, has the power to compel the use of digital ID, that's right, that was one of the big concerns that I keep hearing wherever I go with constituents. It was in Wagga Wagga, it was at Sunday, it was the dominant concern outside of immigration, mass migration. Now that the E-Safety Commissar has the power to compel the use of digital ID, there have been calls for an inquiry into the scope of her powers, which have gone well beyond child safety. This is about control, undoubtedly. As has been pointed out, the public did not vote for the E-Safety Commissar's powers or for her election to office, her appointment to office. It wasn't an election, her appointment to office. A previous inquiry into her role was blocked by Prime Minister Albanese in July. Blocked. That's what happens when you get an absurd government, a lazy government, a dishonest government, an incompetent government, an embarrassing government, having a big majority in the lower house, and combined with the Greens, we were even worse for a combined majority in the upper house. But the Liberal Party, not the Labor Party, not the Greens, the Liberal Party, Prime Minister Turnbull, created the e-safety commissar, and the Liberals still remain very proud of her. Susan Lee gave a speech at the National Press Club reaffirming their pride in and support for the e-safety commissar. Now the Shadow Communications Minister, Melissa McIntosh, has called for an inquiry into the e-safety commissioner's powers. The commissioner was paid $457,844 in 2024. $500,000 to censor us, to put in place controls that she can operate on. And that follows a report from Sky News Australia, which details a letter that Julie Inman-Grant, the e-safety commissar, sent to Melissa McIntosh, the Shadow Minister. To quote Sky News Australia, quote, the e-safety commissar, Sky News doesn't use the term commissar, the e-safety commissioner attempted to wield influence over the opposition's stance on her office. Interesting point. The Australian Financial Review ranked Julie Inman-Grant, the Australia's e-safety commissar, as Australia's third most culturally powerful person. They called her, quote, the tip of Australia's spear in world-first laws, lifting the minimum age to have a social media account, end of quote. What the hell is an American with power to influence our culture? Our key ingredient, our identity, culture. And she can influence the culture? Come on, this is disgraceful. Back to the letter she sent. In attempting to clarify her positions in the most controversial demands of the e-safety office, she actually confirmed what we have been saying about constraints placed upon search engines via compulsory consent moderation and age restriction. Is the e-safety commissar starting to feel the pressure? Is this some hint that accountability for her overreach is starting to manifest? The e-safety commissar has been caught up in global censorship scandals and lawsuits at a huge cost to the taxpayers. She tries to control foreign platforms. One in particular, X. She's not fair in her approach, I believe. She's trying to control them. Censorship. Trying to bully them. Reportedly, she says she'll step down after 10 years. That can't come soon enough. This is voluntary, not regulatory, and does nothing to address the powers of her office, which she's put in place. And she's working on a globalist agenda. She's freely admitted that. She's had interactions with other globalists pushing this agenda. Plus, think about this, keeping an eye on the time. The Greens introduced a motion in the Senate, which got up with the support of the Labor Party, because the Labor and the Greens have 39 of 76 senators, so they have a majority together. So imagine that, the government, the Labor Party, incompetent, dishonest, lazy, hiding stuff from the people, now being managed by the Greens, because that's the way these two work together. The Greens got an inquiry into the misinformation and disinformation in climate change and energy. Of course, they didn't use the term misinformation and disinformation directly in the title. They used information integrity on climate change and energy. The first 2 days, and there will be more hearings, the first 2 days, and I couldn't make them. I was so disappointed that I couldn't make them. 16 witnesses were called in the first 2 days. The first 2 cabs off the rank were government agencies. So they were neutral, pretty much. The other 14 witnesses were pushing for misinformation and disinformation legislation. This has been orchestrated. There are if you get a chance, go to the Senate inquiry into information integrity on climate change and energy. Just Google it, you'll get it. Go and have a look at it. Some of the submissions are just wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful. They're filled with fact and data and observations, hard fact, backing up what they're saying. Mine's in there exactly that, and I'll tell you more about that in coming weeks. The ones that are supporting misinformation, disinformation legislation, and the witnesses included that were supporting that in the 2 days of inquiry, do not provide any evidence. They do not provide any evidence. So what they want is information being censored on their terms. They will tell us what is misinformation, disinformation. Okay, let's move to what should be, we've got 5 minutes left. The US-Australia deal that our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, struck with Donald Trump, or rather, that Donald Trump played. Last week, the White House proudly announced that Australian superannuation funds will increase their investments in the United States to $1.44 trillion by 2035. That's nearly $1 trillion more than current levels. So that means it's almost tripling. Australian workers' retirement savings being used to create tens of thousands of American jobs. In America. What the hell is going on? Let's be clear, this is not a win for Australians. This is yet another example of how our national wealth is being siphoned off to serve globalist interests while our own economy is being left behind. This is absolutely disgraceful. It wasn't a selling of rare earths, it was a sellout of Australia. We're told this is necessary because Australia's market is too small. Although that's only because successive Liberal Labor uniparty governments have failed to create the conditions for large-scale productive investment here at home. There are so many opportunities for investment in our country, for taking our raw materials, whether farming or minerals or gas, and value adding, that we just ship our dirt overseas. We ship our food produce overseas and let someone else get the value added. Imagine what we could do with that capital. Nation building infrastructure, energy security, water projects, and regional development. Imagine the wealth that would come out of this country. I've given the figures on aluminium value added that we ignore in this country. Instead, we're told to be content with investing in Google, while our own industries are strangled in red tape and ESG mandates. ESG stands for environment, social, and governance. Some people say environment, sustainability, and government. It's complete crap. Even BlackRock, which was pushing it, is now pulling out of ESG, and so many other companies are. The globalists don't even want it because it cuts their profit. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, a framework supposedly used to evaluate a company's sustainability and ethical impact. Not profitability, not efficiency, not value adding, just their social impact. Really, it's being used to control and propagate propaganda. It's being used to control the 17 aims, 17 goals that are in the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. It's all rubbish. It's all a control over every aspect of our lives. This government had the chance to use our foreign investment footprint as leverage, especially with the United States. We could have demanded fairer trade terms, the removal of tariffs, and recognition of our strategic partnership. Instead, Labor sold it out. Again. One nation believes in putting Australia first. I'll say that again. One nation believes in putting Australia first. That means using our superannuation, Australian superannuation, to build our nation, Australia, not someone else's nation. It means demanding accountability from fund managers, cutting the ESG nonsense, the DEI nonsense, and creating a business environment where Australian projects are worth investing in. We don't need to send our future offshore. We need to reclaim our future, reclaim it here. There was an item I've just added on as a part of the list. I'm not going to go into it because I thought we'd run out of time. We have. Treasurer Chalmers, who must be one of the most incompetent treasurers ever, is limiting the definition of where cash can be legal tender in this country. I think there was Andrew G. Dai Lee, who's a wonderful representative of her electorate in Sydney, and Bob Katter worked together to develop a bill about defining cash as legal tender. And Chalmers apparently, so it's been reported, said, no, don't do that, we'll do it for you, we'll leave it with us. Now they're restricting the definition of where cash can be legal tender. Massive government intrusion always fails. It causes problems. Every major problem, I've said this so many times, every major problem in our country comes out of that Parliament House building in Canberra and out of the bureaucrats hanging around it. Every massive government intrusion fails. It causes problems. There's a lack of accountability, unlike in a business. There's a lack of listening to people, and there are no consequences of failures. They're just covered up, making businesses harder to run, making people's lives harder to run. Okay, just about to wind up. I'm off to Canberra on Sunday for the next 2 weeks. On the weekend between those 2 weeks, I'll be giving speeches in Adelaide, so I look forward to seeing people in Adelaide. The two functions have been sold out, which is wonderful news, so I'm really looking forward to speaking and answering questions in Adelaide. At the end of the 2 weeks, I'll be going to Perth to speak at a conference opposing wind turbines. Sorry, we're opposing offshore wind turbines. What a disgrace that is. So we blow the lid on that. Then a speech in Melbourne on the same topic and blow the lid on that. Sorry, no time for Q&A today. I have to meet that other meeting. That's our weekly wrap-up from the only opposition party, the sensible party, the only party listening to and serving the Australian people. Have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves.